calling these products irresistible is dangerous. Calling these things addictive and saying that they are, Tristan Harris says they are hijacking your brain, is dangerous. And the reason it's dangerous is because of this concept called learned helplessness, which tells us that when people reduce their sense of agency, when they begin to believe that something is controlling them, when they give up their internal locus of control for an external locus of control, they begin to act accordingly. So it is true that these products are meant to habituate you. They are meant and designed to change your behavior. But to call them addictive, to say that they're controlling our brains, that we cannot resist them, is not helpful because it's not true.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Look Up podcast. I'm your host, Mark Weinstein. And on this episode of Look Up, I interviewed Nir Eyal. Nir writes, consults, and teaches about the intersection of psychology, technology, and business. He's an entrepreneur and investor who has started 2 companies and invested in many more, including Eventbrite, Refresh.io, and Anchor.fm, which was sold to Spotify. He's the author of the best-selling book, Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And more recently, he wrote Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life, which is the book that Nir and I mostly discussed. Nir has also been a professor at his alma mater, the Stanford School of Business. This was a great conversation because Nir challenged some of the ideas that I held before we met. His goal is to put the power back into the hands of the individual. So we dive deep into what constitutes addiction versus habit-forming behavior. Nir questions the very premise that we're addicted to our phones because he believes that it takes our own individual power away from us. We discuss learned helplessness and the steps that we can take to regain control of our attention. For those of us who feel hopelessly addicted to technology, this episode can offer some guidance on how to start breaking bad habits. I also learned that an old study claiming that willpower is a finite resource was actually debunked. And what's more interesting is that willpower only acts like a finite resource if you believe that it is. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. As always, the important links are in the show notes if you want to learn more. Feel free to email me at mark@thelookuppodcast.com if you have any ideas, recommendations, or questions. This is Nir Eyal. Thank you, Nir, for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
I know it's new, and you've been on a lot of these before, so I really appreciate you agreeing to come on.
No, your topic is so laser focused with something I'm so passionate about, and has spent more than a decade now before it was cool thinking about it.
It's crazy to me. I mean, it's really finally catching steam with a mainstream audience, which I think is so good. I think awareness is like the absolute first step. So. What you're doing in writing about this, I think, and really kind of going deep on how it works is crucial. We just don't understand just how badly our attention is manipulated.
Yeah, that's true. I just want to make sure it doesn't creak too much on the sound, so I'm going to stop touching the table.
All good.
And I think when I got started in this field, I started out in 2007. In this field. So this was before apps even existed, at least as we know them today. There was no such thing as apps on the iPhone, at least.
And when you say this field, what do you just define?
Of behavioral design.
Got it. Okay.
So when I got started, we started this company we were building advertising for Facebook apps, because back then when someone said apps, nobody was talking about what we think of today as apps on your iPhone, because the Apple App Store didn't exist. It didn't come out until 2008.
It's so hard to imagine a world without the Apple App Store.
Exactly.
We both grew up in that world.
But what we saw very quickly, what was amazing at that time is that, this was when Facebook was still very young. People were making apps, this was the time of people throwing sheep at each other. Remember those days in like Farmville and all the silly things that people were doing on Facebook apps. And what we saw in the business that I helped co-found was that you could reach millions of people in the span of days, as opposed to it used to take, months, if not years, to reach 1 million people. All of a sudden, through viral spread of these apps, you could reach a lot of people very quickly. And that was really fascinating because the knock-on effect of that was that very quickly, many of these apps just died. Like they would get 1 million people to use them.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks. They would get 1 million people to download the app and start using it. And then, a week later, nobody would use it anymore. And so that was my vantage point to try and understand the psychology behind retention. What is it that makes some apps so successful while others just, perish because nobody uses them anymore? And so my thinking was, wow, we could take the psychology that's at the root of many of these products and use it for good, right? Why is it that only the gaming companies and only companies like Facebook and YouTube, why should they have a monopoly on consumer psychology? We can use the same psychology for good for all sorts of things. And that's why I got into writing Hooked.
And what, I guess, first let's dive into the psychology of it. So, I recently had the privilege of speaking with Adam Alter, who wrote Irresistible, and we talked a little bit about these hooks that you describe. What are kind of the emotions that today's app developers and some of the large tech giants, FANG, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google are tapping into? What emotions specifically?
Yeah. So the first part of the hook model, which is what I describe in my book, Hooked, there's a 4-part model. And the first part, and the most important part, is what's called an internal trigger. An internal trigger is a negative psychological state that we seek to escape. Now, let's back up just a second to say, okay, if we ask ourselves what techniques are companies using to drive our behavior, we need to back up and ask a more fundamental question of what drives our behavior, period, full stop. And the answer to that is not what most people understand it to be, that most people are still operating under this, what's called the pleasure principle, which was first proposed, long time ago, but it was popularized by Freud, right? I mean, it was Epicurus before that had something very similar, but Freud kind of popularized this notion of the pleasure principle, which says that humans all motivation is around the drive to pursue pleasure and avoid pain. Turns out that's not true.
Oh, interesting.
Neurologically speaking, it turns out that all human behavior is motivated by a desire to escape discomfort. It's called the homeostatic response. So when you feel cold, you put on a jacket. You're spurred to action and put on a jacket. When you feel hot, you take it off. When you're hungry, you feel hunger pangs, you eat. When you're full, that doesn't feel good, you stop eating. So that's physiological responses to discomfort. The same goes for psychological responses to discomfort. So when you are feeling lonely, you check Facebook. When you're feeling uncertain, you Google. When you're feeling bored, you check Netflix or stock prices or sports scores or the news. The list goes on and on. So the most important psychological hack that these companies use is to understand your internal trigger. Now, this isn't sinister per se. We have to talk about the ethics of manipulation because it's not necessarily that manipulation is always a bad thing. Well, how can that be? Isn't manipulation always bad? Not really. We pay for the privilege of being manipulated, right? When you go to the movie theater, you know that is just a flickering screen of light, right? Those aren't real people with real emotions, right? Yeah. Brad Pitt is being paid to fake you out and manipulate your emotions, and you pay for the privilege. So it's not that manipulation is always bad. And there's 2 types of manipulation. I talk about this a lot. I've written an article about how to use this for good.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed, and sorry to interrupt, but one thing I've noticed from your work and kind of hearing you speak today is, you have a very specific, wow, I might make myself sound really stupid right now, praxeology. Is that the word I'm going for? You define things very clearly, very specifically.
Well, words really matter. This is what bugs me so much about this debate, and specifically this word addiction. And this is the word that I think gets tossed around so much that we don't know what it means anymore. My wife got a box from this company, DSW, it's a shoe company.
Yes.
And on the side of the box, it says, danger, highly addictive contents inside. We're talking about shoes, right? And this is the problem I think people make with technology, and people don't realize that using the wrong words can backfire, can literally make things worse. And so, I love Adam Alter. He's great. I appreciate his contribution to the field. But look, calling these products irresistible is dangerous. Calling these things addictive and saying that they are, Tristan Harris says, they are hijacking your brain is dangerous. And the reason it's dangerous is because of this concept called learned helplessness, which tells us that when people reduce their sense of agency, when they begin to believe that something is controlling them, when they give up their internal locus of control for an external locus of control, they begin to act accordingly. So it is true that these products are meant to habituate you. They are meant and designed to change your behavior. But to call them addictive, to say that they're controlling our brains, that we cannot resist them, is not helpful because it's not true, which is why I wrote Indistractable. Indistractable is really about this 5-year journey that I went through, starting from believing this idea that it's all technology's fault. And then I tried all these techniques. I tried digital minimalism and I tried digital detoxes and I did everything that the books were telling me to do, and it didn't work because I didn't deal with a deeper psychology, because I didn't understand the psychology of distraction.
So much to unpack there. I love it. And I love to see how, meeting new people in kind of a similar field, but the way that you approach it differently is going to start to build on itself, So going back to definitions, addiction versus habit, I think you kind of described it. Addiction is something that we lack agency over.
So let's define it. Let's get it out there. So a habit is an impulse to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. It's about half of what you do every day. Nothing bad about habits. We have good habits and we have bad habits depending on whether they serve you or whether you're serving it. So the book, Hooked, my publisher wanted me to call it How to Build Addictive Products, and I didn't, very intentionally. I called it How to Build Habit-Forming Products, with the intent that people
must have been an interesting battle.
It was a little bit, but the intent was that, we can use these same techniques for good, right? And so I didn't write the book for Facebook and for Google, and those companies already knew those techniques. I wrote the book. I wrote the book for everybody else, for these companies that are trying to make products to help people exercise more, like Fitbot is a company that used the app, a company like Kahoot in the educational space that just went public, largest, most widely used educational software in the world. So we can use these same techniques for good to help people improve their lives. That's why I wrote Hooked. But let's get back to the definition of addiction. This is super important.
Let's go to that.
So a habit is an impulse to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. An addiction is a persistent compulsive dependency on a behavior or substance that harms the user. So it's something that hurts you. That's critical in definition. And despite efforts to stop, you can't stop. And so when people say that technology is addictive, they are taking what is a pathology and they're making it into something colloquial that we blame on everything. Oh, I like Facebook a lot. I'm addicted to it. Well, not really. 1, have you tried to stop? And number 2, does it do you harm? And number 3, despite the harm and despite you trying, can you not stop? And so Indistractable gives people a recipe. And it's not your fault, by the way. I'm not guilt tripping anybody. I went on this journey myself of saying, oh my God, it's the technology doing it to me. I tried these techniques. And you know what? I found these series of techniques that we can use. And I discovered, I hate to tell you, it's not that hard, right? There are some really basic things that we can do if we take agency over the problem. The problem is right now, we're waiting for the government to save us. We're waiting for Mark Zuckerberg to do something. Why are we waiting? We can do something about it right now, and it's not that hard.
Well, I definitely want to dive into kind of those practices because I think that's really important for people to hear, that they can take agency over their own lives. It's funny because I feel myself, maybe because of the journey that I'm on right now, feeling a little bit, a little bit reluctant to accept that we do have that agency. Because I know so many people that this technology does harm. It does harm their interpersonal relationships. It harms their mental health. They're depressed. They're jealous. They're feeling inadequate. And those emotions are exacerbated by the perpetual bombardment of media through these platforms that is designed to make them feel lacking so that they can continue using those platforms. And so I feel like in those 3 criteria you mentioned, one being, does it do harm? That box does get checked for many of us who struggle with social media habituation, we'll call it, rather than addiction. And then the second part of that I think, leads me to believe that some of this is addictive is I don't know that people do have the ability to control themselves with some of these practices because chemically they are, the kick I get from likes is so similar to the kick I would get from doing a line of cocaine.
No, it's not. This is something that the press. This is something that the press has repeated ad nauseum.
Okay.
No neuroscientist will tell you that is in any way, shape, or form true. Okay. We are not injecting Instagram. We are not freebasing Facebook. These are behaviors, and people can get addicted to behaviors. But let me posit this question. I used to say when I first started on this journey that these technologies are like cigarettes. This is something that Ian Bogo said, a professor at Georgia Tech. He said, technology is a cigarette of this century. And I used to repeat that.
Yeah. It's something I say, actually.
And it's bullshit. And the reason it's bullshit is because technology is not like cigarettes, because cigarettes have a substance in them called nicotine, which enters your brain and does things to your brain. It affects your prefrontal cortex and does certain things to your brain. Now, there's a lot of interesting science we can go into later about how that happens. But let's take a pause here, because I don't say that anymore, because what technology is really like, if anything, if we want to compare it to a drug, it's not like cocaine. It's certainly not like heroin. It's not like cigarettes. It's like cannabis. It's like cannabis. Cannabis, we all know, has nothing chemically addictive about it. You agree?
I don't know enough.
Anybody who studies addiction will tell you that THC is not chemically addictive.
Okay.
And yet,
I know a few potheads that might.
Exactly. And yet, 8% of people who smoke cannabis have what's called a cannabis use disorder. Well, how can that be? If there is nothing chemically addictive about cannabis, it's ironic, by the way, that we live in an age where people want to legalize cannabis and regulate technology. Yeah. And neither of them are chemically addictive. There's nothing that breaks the blood-brain barrier when it comes to cannabis or Facebook. And so why is this? Why do we have this double standard? And yet, even though there's nothing chemically addictive about cannabis, 8%, which is crazy high, 8% of people who smoke cannabis have a cannabis use disorder. Why is that? Because addiction is never just about the substance. Nobody falls on a heroin needle and says, oh my gosh, now I'm addicted. Over 1 million women every year, when they get a cesarean section in the United States, receive fentanyl. Fentanyl. This is the highest grade opiate that you can get. It is much better than street heroin. Why aren't they all addicted? It's a highly addictive substance. This is the problem. When we perpetuate this myth of addiction, and now the latest...
They probably don't want to repeat that.
Because they don't need it. This is the thing. And this is where I think what many people see, they see people who overuse technology, and they are miserable. And they assume that they became miserable, that it's causing mental illness. The causality is exactly backwards. People are overusing technology, particularly kids, because of these internal triggers, because there is stuff in their life that they don't know how to deal with without escaping reality. And that is the root of all addiction: pornography addiction, booze addiction, food addiction, or technology addiction. And so unless we acknowledge that fact, if we keep blaming the substance, we are doing the exact same thing we used to do in the 80s when Nancy Reagan was telling us just say no. That's a load of bullshit about drugs. It's the same bullshit about technology.
Well, I think it's the same, and to flip that a little bit, Nancy Reagan saying just say no is also trying to give back agency to the individual to say you can say no to drugs, right? But in both cases,
they're ignoring the deeper truth of why people do drugs.
Yeah, exactly.
And look,
and I hear you on causality. Like it makes perfect sense to me that social media in and of itself is just a tool. It's a technology. And that tool can be used for great things, right? It is a connection engine.
Well, no, I'll go further than that. I'll tell you that if you have a susceptibility, they're going to get you. Yeah. They will absolutely get you in this day and age. In this day and age, if you don't have the tools to be indistractable, if you don't know how to put this stuff in its place and deal with it, they will get you in the moment unequivocally. And it's harder than ever because it's ubiquitous. We're constantly carrying around these little slot machines.
It's in our pocket,
right.
It's on our wrist, it's now in our ears, and it's going to be inside of our bodies.
But we have to stop using this as an excuse. We have, because we're talking about single-digit percentage of people who actually have a pathology towards addiction. And those people deserve special protection. I wrote about this over 3 years ago, that people who have addictions need special protection from these companies. And I've been talking to all the tech companies about having what's called a use and abuse policy to identify these individuals and do something.
KYCs into the platform, I have this propensity, or they notice some data about this user.
Right, so this is the big difference.
This is an at-risk user.
Exactly.
And therefore we need to
do something.
Do something specific for this user.
That's right. And alcohol manufacturers can't do that. They don't know who the alcoholics are. But these gaming companies know.
Yeah.
And so I've been talking to all of them about this is the lowest hanging fruit. If there's anything we do need to regulate, if there's anything these companies can do today, it's doing something about A, children. They can do something about it. And B, people who are actually addicted. For everybody else out there, the 95 to 99% of us, we have to take personal responsibility and stop blaming others for our problems.
So here's the thing though, right? Like personal responsibility, and you're definitely going to get into kind of the habits that you've identified. I talked about this with Adam, like, because it's funny, although you both disagree on the word addiction. In fact, I think he talks a little bit about top down, but he also mostly focuses on bottom up, right? So what practices can we put into place? I also interviewed a gentleman named Thomas Sobel, who created a company that is about forming healthy habits around technology. So wake up in the morning, don't touch your phone for an hour. Before you go to bed at night, do the same. Set limits, boundaries. When I'm at dinner, I don't have my phone with me. And I hope that you don't either. Go out and do something fun with friends instead. This is all great. The problem is the kind of unstoppable march towards the integration of this technology within the human. I mentioned this in another episode. Josh Wolf at Lux Capital talks about the half-life of the human tech interface, right? In the 70s, it was mainframes. You go up with a couple of plugs, beep, bloop, bleep. You plug it into the computer, and then that accelerated through desktop, through laptop, through mobile phone, which is separated by a thin piece of cloth for men, to the Apple Watch, which is directly on your skin, to the AirPods, which are now in your ears. And before we know it, it will be in our eyes or wherever. Habit-forming behavior becomes a lot more challenging when that tech is completely integrated into our being. And I see you patiently waiting here for me to finish this thought, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, take your time.
But a lot of the habits that I've been recommended go out the window as soon as I can't remove the tech from my person.
Well, let's deal with that problem when it gets here.
But it's
currently
on the way, right?
Sure.
So I think
and let's. I'm wearing a smartwatch. I love my earbuds, whatever they're called. AirPods. Yeah.
They were earbuds for a little bit.
And we'll have to see. I will. It's very hard to prognosticate about technology that isn't here yet. I will say that if you think the world is distracting now, it's only going to become more distracting, right? As technology continues to accelerate and become more pervasive as well as persuasive, it is going to become more challenging to put it in its place unless you know how. And that's really why I wanted to put together a framework that people can picture in their minds and teach others and wear with pride this moniker of being indistractable. Like, I want becoming indistractable to be the moniker in the same way people today say that they're keto or vegan or whatever. There needs to be a certain way of living that you can describe to somebody else that allows you to do what is today a very strange set of behaviors, right? Like, for example, when I write every morning, I hit a couple buttons on my phone, and if anybody texts or calls me, they receive an automatic reply that says, right now I'm indistractable. If it's urgent, text me with the word urgent, and it'll come through.
I love it.
Things like time boxing my calendar. So there's this picture that I can draw for you here mentally. Hopefully your listeners can picture it as well, about how to put all these techniques together and teach other people in a way that is super impactful. But the first step, the first thing we have to stop convincing ourselves of is that we are powerless. Because when we tell, there was this great study that found the number one determinant of whether a person who was addicted could recover after treatment was not the level of physical dependency. It wasn't what the drugs were doing to their bodies. It was their belief in their own power to change. That was more important than their level of physical dependency.
I'm really struggling with this, actually. This is great because I haven't had an episode where I've really just disagreed. And you know so much more about this than I do, so I'm hoping to learn. But the difference here is when I'm a heroin user or a cocaine addict, the promoter of that substance is a drug dealer or the people that I surround myself with. And so I can remove myself easily from those situations and rebuild relationships with people that are forming healthy habits, whether that be AA or, some other organization, a religious group, something like that. In this instance, I'm battling thousands of engineers whose sole purpose.
So what?
This
is repeated ad nauseum. So the fuck what? It doesn't matter.
But not
because there is
has the
nothing that
superhuman
Mark
abilities that
Zuckerberg
you
can
have.
do if you turn off your goddamn notification settings. 2/3 of people with a phone never change their notification settings. What?
Yeah, but just to flip that.
Let me give you another one.
When
you
shut your notification settings off, then you're left with this dull sense of maybe I'm missing something. So it's almost like the reverse happens.
Here's what we have to work through.
This for me. Maybe I'm just weak.
This is a perfect. No. This is
great.
not a guilt trip. Look, I went through this struggle. I did what the experts told me. I did what all the experts say to do. It doesn't work if first, let's walk through these 4 steps of the Indistractable model.
Okay.
The first step is to deal with internal triggers. Okay, so here I'm going to draw this picture in your mind first and foremost. So I want you to picture a number line, okay? And to the right, think it's traction. That right arrow is moving you towards traction. The opposite of traction is distraction on the left-hand side. So you got traction to the right, distraction to the left, okay? Traction is defined as any action that moves you towards what you want in life, what you really want to be doing with your time. Distraction is the opposite, anything that moves you away from what you really want to do. Okay, so you got that. So you got a number line, traction, distraction. Now, you've got 2 arrows pointing to the center of that number line. On top is internal triggers. On the bottom is external triggers. Now, internal triggers, let's start with that. So you got basically 2 arrows pointing in and 2 arrows pointing out. Traction, distraction, internal trigger, external trigger. This is it. This is the Indistractable model. And it starts, the first and foremost, most important step is to start with those internal triggers. Because if you don't deal with that internal trigger, that uncomfortable emotional state, that psychological response that is driving you towards distraction, you will always get distracted by something. Let me tell you my story, okay? I sat down with my daughter. This was probably, 5 years ago now. This was shortly after Hooked was published, my first book. And I sat down with my daughter, and we had this beautiful moment where I had the afternoon free, and I spent time with her with this book of activities that daddies and daughters could do together. Yeah. And maybe like an hour into playtime, we had this book, and one of the activities was asked, if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I remember that question, and I wish I could tell you what she said, but I couldn't, because in that moment, I got distracted. I found myself on my device, and I wasn't listening to what she said. Oh, wow. And so that was this moment that I thought, oh my God, I got hooked. I know how these things worked. I help people design products to create habits, and yet here I am, I got hooked myself. Yeah. And so that's when I went on this 5-year journey to try and figure out. And the reason why it took me so long to finish this book is because I went down so many dead ends. I bought all the other books on how to control distraction, and none of them worked. Most of them say, get rid of the technology, and that's what I did. I got a word processor on eBay from the 1990s. This old library sold it to me, and it has no connection to the internet, and I was going to do all my writing on that. And I got a flip phone. I got this $12 flip phone on Alibaba that does nothing but make calls and send text messages. I got rid of my smartphone, and I used that. And here's what happened. I'd sit down at my desk, and I'd start writing, which is really hard, something I still struggle to get to. I get distracted when I write. One of
those things that you just have to sit down, and it takes a lot of time.
And here's what I would do. No smartphone, no internet connection, but behind me there's a bookshelf. I'd say, oh, you know what? I really should read that one book I've been meaning to read. Or, the trash needs to be taken out. Oh, you know what? The laundry really needs to be folded right now.
You're hungry. You need
exactly.
Yeah.
And you think this is a new problem? Socrates and Aristotle talked about this problem 2,500 years ago. It's called akrasia, this tendency that we have to do things against our better interest. So today it's Facebook and the internet. Yesterday it was the television was rotting our brains. Before that it was video games and comic books and the radio and the written word. All of these things were supposed to be rotting our brains, and we all did the same thing we're doing right now. Blame the technology. Blame the innovation. The fact is, if you don't deal with what you are trying to escape, look, the fact that I couldn't sit at the dinner table without wanting to look at my phone, and I was snubbing my daughter and my wife, it wasn't technology's fault. It's because there were issues that I wasn't dealing with in my life. There were things that I was trying to escape, that I was uncomfortable with, and I didn't know how to deal with them in a healthy manner. And if we don't start from there, and this is where every other book on the topic goes wrong, is that they look at the proximal cause. They look at, it's like if you play pool. I don't know if you play pool, but you think, well. Yeah, me neither, right? So you think about, okay, what causes the cue ball to hit the next ball? Is it the stick or is it the player? Well, clearly the root cause is the player. The proximal cause is the stick. Everybody's blaming the stick. Everybody's blaming the technology. And what we need to do is to ask ourselves, what can we do differently? Because that is in our control. We didn't create Facebook. It's not our fault that Facebook exists. But number one, it's not going away. And number two, it's our responsibility to do something about it. So the first step in this 4-part model that I described earlier is dealing with those internal triggers. And I give a lot of techniques in the book on how to deal with that. There's a lot there, none of which is meditating or mindfulness, just so you know.
It's funny because meditating and mindfulness, in some ways, it is overprescribed. And I find specifically with my meditation practice that, it's still doing something.
Yeah.
Right? Like I am doing meditation. Yeah. Right?
And there's nothing wrong with meditation and mindfulness. I'm not anti. It's just been written about so much that I didn't have anything to add to that.
Well, I do want to step in on the internal causes because one of the ironies, it's actually not an irony in my opinion, but some people that I'm close with find ironic, is that I am actually in fact I have a strong habit of using my phone very often. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm on this personal exploration. I have to say, it's actually gotten worse since I started this journey.
Interesting.
And so like to hear you talk about, taking agency, it's kind of forced me in this very brief moment to reflect a little bit and say, has it gotten worse because I've just said, this is addictive stuff. And I tell my, I'm addicted, I can't help it.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, Mark, you're not addicted. You can control it. You don't need to look at Facebook right now. So that's interesting. That's causing me to think about that.
And I'll be the first to admit, when I'm feeling particularly stressed, lonely, anxious, uncertain, that's when I'm more likely to look for distraction. That's all human behavior, as I mentioned earlier, all human behavior is driven by a desire to escape discomfort. And that means, if that's true, that all behavior is driven by a desire to escape discomfort, this homeostatic response, that means that time management and attention management is pain management. We have to learn how to deal with our discomfort in a healthier way. And so I give these 3 techniques in the book of how to reimagine the trigger, how to reimagine the task, and how to reimagine our temperament. The reimagining the temperament is super important. This is where I talk about how the psychology community has really screwed us in the past decade or so by perpetuating myths, or what we know today to be myths, around concepts like ego depletion. Ego depletion is this idea that I got a lot of academic support about a decade ago. The idea is that willpower decreases with effort. Roy Baumeister wrote this book called Willpower.
Willpower is a finite
Exactly. It's a finite resource that if he did these studies where
focus on one habit, you build one habit at a time.
Well, he did these famous studies where he gave people lemonade, and if they drank lemonade, then their willpower was filled up like a gas tank. And it turns out those studies don't replicate, that ego depletion doesn't really exist, except there's one circumstance where ego depletion does exist. And that one circumstance, surprisingly enough, is when people believe it to be true. So if you believe that your gas tank has run out, that your ego is depleted, that you have run out of willpower, a la, I am addicted, this technology is doing it to me, your temperament is such that you will act according to whatever it is you believe. So that is super important. So that's just the first step. The second step, I'll go very quickly because I don't want to bore you here. The second step is about making time for traction. So it turns out only about 10% of people out there keep a calendar, which means that we complain about getting distracted all day long without knowing what we got distracted from. And I call bullshit. If you don't know what is it that you plan to do, you have no right to say you got distracted. How can you tell the difference between traction and distraction unless you have it somewhere written down what it is you wanted to do? So if you plan time in your day, like I do, it's on my calendar, and this is a technique I had to learn over time. I kept a to-do list forever because I went to Stanford Business School and they say keep to-do lists, and that's what I did. It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
I have plenty of to-do lists. I put them in like an Eisenhower matrix.
Exactly. So we keep these to-do lists because we think magically if we write it down, it's going to get done. And that's not true. We have to plan the time, the input, not the output. So we plan out input for how much time we want to spend with our family, how much time we want to spend on ourselves, how much time we want at different work tasks, and how much time we want on social media. So in my calendar every day from 6:30 to 8:30, that's my social media time. And I enjoy it guilt-free because I have turned something that was otherwise a distraction into traction. That is exactly what I plan to do with my time. There's nothing wrong with it.
And
It's
what
great.
do you do when you're on social? Are you mostly creating
None of your damn
content?
business. No, I'm just kidding. No, I do what everybody else does. I keep in touch with friends. I mean, you know how many friends there would be no way I would stay in touch with? I mean,
Yeah.
I was born in Israel. I grew up in Orlando.
Yeah.
I went to school in Atlanta. I moved to New York. Then I moved to California. Now I'm back in New York. I've got friends all over the
I
country.
traveled a lot, man.
Without social media, how could I possibly be connected to all of them? And so I love it. It's fantastic. Now, what I don't love was when I was using it when I didn't intend. That's when it's harmful. But if we use it with intent, it's perfectly fine.
Interesting. And do you feel that connectivity is valuable, or do you? Because this is a bit of a loaded question, so I'm going to rephrase it as not a question. I sometimes question whether I need to be connected to 5,000 air quotes friends instead of just being focused on, call it 20 to 30 people in my tribe that I really want to spend time building those relationships.
Right. So this is where we need to ask the question of what is the harm caused by these technologies? And the principal harm, I believe, is an opportunity cost. It's not melting your brain by looking at Facebook. That's rubbish. Video games don't rot kids' brains. I mean, we have tons of oodles of evidence.
When I was younger, I was obsessed with some of those.
Look, 90% of Silicon Valley engineers spend tons of time on playing video games. The harm done is the opportunity cost of what it displaces. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with checking social media for a defined number of hours per day by saying, this is time I want to spend connecting with friends and family. Totally healthy. What's not healthy is when we do it instead of the other things. And that's why we have to be conscious of the way we spend our time. Look, you could substitute our entire conversation with television and it would be equally as bad. The average American watches 5 hours of television a day.
Yeah.
Okay. Facebook tells us that the average Facebook user only spends 1 hour a day on Facebook, but somehow we're all,
Well, it used to be television,
right?
As you mentioned, so I've definitely.
But now nobody talks about it anymore. Why? Because it's old technology. Because we were born with it, and that's what happens with every successive generation. But the nefarious effects are just as terrible with television.
I wonder about that sometimes because I'm like, okay, is it just this time is different? Every single time a new technology comes out, we want to, there's people who want to rally against it. I guess for me, as I've gone through that question, when I think about current tech, I find it's because it's so hyper personalized and it knows so much about us, and it's able to leverage that knowledge in order to not entirely control our behavior, as you're saying, but to influence our behavior. That to me is much more potentially harmful and toxic than the TV is in my room and I'm going to go sit down and passively scroll through it.
Well, it's also potentially much more helpful, right? I mean, oh my God, I mean, if you're, so I grew up, my coming of age was in the 1990s. My oldest brother, he's 10 years older, came out as gay back in this was 1992.
Oh, wow.
That was a really difficult time to come
Wow.
out. AIDS was called gay cancer back then.
Wow.
And I had nowhere to go. I had nowhere to go. I could not, it was a secret. My family didn't know. I knew. And I could not go anywhere. And I remember I still get chills. I'm about to cry just thinking about it. It was the worst time in my life to go to middle school and have this guy that I had, having to keep this secret from my family. And I literally, I broke down one day and had to go to my guidance counselor, who was a super conservative Christian lady who was absolutely no help. Today, that's not the case anymore. If I was growing up today, I could go online and seek support and seek help and find like-minded people because of the exact same reasons that you find technology to be harmful, because it is personalized, because it is customizable, right? So we have to make sure that we accept the goods along with dealing with the bads.
So you're not saying that the bads don't exist.
Of course they exist. Statement. Paul Virillo said that you can't invent the ship without inventing the shipwreck. There are lots of bads. I am not a tech apologist. We need to take these companies to task for their monopoly status, for their data incursions, for the election meddling. There's lots of stuff we need to hold these companies accountable for. But when it comes to this particular area of technology is manipulating us and rewiring our brains and it's hijacking us, it's rubbish. It's one area that is truly a distraction from the real questions that these companies need to hear from.
That's really interesting. So going back to your framework for becoming indistractable, so number one is dealing with kind of the internal problems. It's funny, like a lot of those, it's odd that the same coping mechanisms are used for something like boredom and something like anxiety. Maybe is anxiety just a form of boredom?
No, I think it's actually probably a unique internal trigger, and it's something that people go to and have been going to all sorts of different products and services and people for comfort. It just so happens that that this medium in our pocket is one that's more accessible, and many people find more helpful than past mediums. But again, I think that using them correctly, and this is nobody's fault. Again, I'm not guilt tripping anybody because I've been on this journey myself. We just don't know the tools yet. We haven't adopted the social norms for how to use this stuff in a way that serves us as opposed to us serving it. So, we talked about internal triggers. That's critical. Dealing with this uncomfortable emotional state, understanding that if you're getting distracted habitually, it's always because of an escape from some feeling you don't want to feel. Then we've got to book our time. So we've got to make time for traction. That's the second step. I talked about the Indistractable model. So on the traction side.
Actually, that was something I wanted to touch on. So I thought you were going to go in a different direction. I thought you were going to say, bucket out time for deep work because
that's true.
That's
that
another
too.
focus.
Absolutely.
But you actually said, I'm going to actively bucket time for when I'm using this technology.
And look, I love the concept of deep work, focused work. I don't like the concept of digital detoxes. And the reason, another personal story from my early life, I at one point was clinically obese. And I went on all kinds of fad diets.
Oh, wow, I can't see it.
Well,
I honestly couldn't
I still
imagine.
struggle with food, but yeah, at one time, my mom took me to fat camp and the whole
way.
it was like, it's terrible.
Nir
But anyway,
Eyal, step on the scale.
yeah, terrible.
Get off the
Don't tell me
scale.
that. you're gonna send me back to
I'm just
camp
thinking of
days.
heavyweights right now. I love that movie.
No, so one of the things that I did when I was trying to lose weight was go on some kind of crash diet. Okay, no junk food for 30 days. Guess what happened on day 31?
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Like I ate everything and then some.
Yeah.
And so when we tell people to go on these stupid 30-day digital detox, come on, it's ridiculous. My livelihood depends on me using these
I
technologies.
just know so many people. It's like I delete Instagram, then I download it again. I
Right.
delete it. Like I'm
Exactly.
deleting Instagram today,
Exactly.
and then they just
So
go
this
back.
leads into the third point of external triggers. We know that 2/3 of people with a smartphone never bother to change their notification settings. And so my solution is not to stop using them, it's to use them properly. And one of the most important steps is to make sure that we give access to people to access us when it serves us, not the game maker, not the app maker, on our schedule, not theirs. So in the book, I talk about step by step how in less than 30 minutes, you can go through your phone and make it a phone that will not distract you anymore, right? And it's not hard stuff, but we also need to do it in other circumstances where we can get distracted. For example, on our desktop. At work, one of the biggest culprits when it comes to distraction at work is not necessarily our technology. It's people stopping by our desk and saying, "Hey, I just want to talk to you for a minute."
This is why I hate working at the office.
Exactly.
I much prefer to work.
Exactly.
I go back from LA to New York. In LA, I'm at the office, and I feel like I get nothing done.
Right.
And then in New York, I feel like I get a ton done because no one's there to bother me.
That's exactly right. So we got to look at all these situations, all these environments where we could just get distracted and remove the external triggers, right? Remove those external triggers. And there's nothing that Zuckerberg can do about it, right? So for example, Facebook, I love Facebook. It's very helpful. I don't use it on my phone. I use it on my desktop during a scheduled time of day, right? So there's things like that we can do to remove the external triggers from our devices.
Did you have to go through a process of literally changing your logins on your mobile phone for other applications? Because, I also tried to not use Facebook on my phone, and then I always end up getting sucked back in because Facebook in a way has become a form of identity online. And so you use it for all these other apps as a simple way to log into them and for them to verify who you are. So I'd log into, like Seamless or something to go order food and be like, your email's not connected. You need your Facebook. And maybe I'm lazy, but I just was like, all right, I'll just get back on Facebook on my phone. And before I knew it, I was using it again for Messenger and all that.
Yeah, I haven't really thought of it. I tend to sign up on sites without my Facebook login for some reason. I use my email address if that's an option. But yeah, I didn't really think about it for the context of this book around distraction as much.
Yeah, I just think about, putting things in context, right? Protecting yourself from these external triggers. It's like sometimes I feel like that can even exacerbate the problem. I mentioned this earlier. I've removed notifications from my phone.
Yeah.
And all it's done for me is I think maybe I need to work on step one. Maybe that's what I'm realizing here.
So you do have to use them in order. That is absolutely true. A lot of people will jump to the steps in improper order, and then it backfires.
But let's go back to step one, because I'm fascinated.
By the way, there's one more step we need to get to, step 4.
All right, let's do step 4.
Well, we can do that later if you want.
No, let's do step 4 first.
Okay.
And then we'll go back to step 1, because I feel like step 1 is crucial, but it's also the most difficult.
It is.
And there's like
difficult.
an entire, millennia of work on step 1 that we could talk about.
Yes, and it depends on the severity of the problem. Look, I profiled this lady in the book who gets. I don't use the word lightly, but in this case, I think it's true. She gets addicted to her pedometer. You say, well, how can that happen? Pedometers are these devices that make people healthier, right? It makes us walk more steps.
Yep. I've heard many cases of this, by the way.
And here's the underlying story. It wasn't the pedometer. It's never the pedometer. It's never the drugs. It's never the booze. It's never the porn. Addiction requires 3 factors, okay? It's kind of like, remember when you were a kid, you learned about the fire triangle? And fire always requires heat, fuel, and oxygen. You need those 3 things to have a fire. Same thing with addiction. Addiction requires 3 things. It requires pain. It requires an uncomfortable thing in your life that you're seeking to escape from. It requires a person with a predilection for addiction. And then finally, it requires the product, the thing that helps us escape that discomfort. Without those 3 things at once, you don't get addiction. You need all 3. You need the pain, the person, and the product. If you take out one of those 3 things, you don't have the addiction. But the most important of those 3 is the pain. If a person is in emotional discomfort, they will look for that distraction. So back to the story about this woman who was addicted to her pedometer. As I learned more about her story, she did a TED Talk actually about how she got addicted to this pedometer.
Oh, cool.
But as I dug deeper into her story, she told me that she was, at the same time that she got addicted to her pedometer, she was in the midst of getting a divorce. She was also very stressed out about getting her new academic appointment. She was looking for a job, and she was looking for a full-time professorship. And so she was using her pedometer as an escape from reality. I mean, you can go online and you can find that people become addicted to just about anything. Here's the thing I want you to remember. Any analgesic is potentially addictive. Anything that solves pain will addict someone. You will find people who are addicted to Tylenol, people who are addicted, of course we know people who are addicted to pornography or the internet, the news, alcohol. All of these things are addictive. I did a story once for The Atlantic where I talked to people who were addicted to Q-tips. No joke. Type into Google Q-tip addiction. There are people who are pathologically addicted to Q-tips. Yes, because it solves pain. Anything that solves pain. Yeah, not great for them. Yeah. Anything that solves pain is potentially addictive. And so we have to deal with those internal triggers first, or we'll always find something.
So and I know we have to get to number 4, but kind of going back to the beginning of this conversation, you talked about how we can use behavioral design and an understanding of the psychology to create products that are actually helpful and useful for people.
Yeah.
So how can we tap into that? How can we tap into that pain and create something that's addictive and yet beneficial?
Habit forming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was saying
not
addictive. Well, because maybe we want people to be addicted to, to positive habit forming.
We want them habituated to positive things. So addiction's
always
exactly. Addictions always cause harm. We would never want to create an addiction.
To hammer that.
But addiction is an unfortunate byproduct of something that is used by sufficient numbers of people. So sufficient numbers of people use Q-tips, somebody gets addicted. So 2 billion people use Facebook. Yes, some people are addicted to Facebook. But that's not because it's addictive to everyone, right? Many people have a glass of wine with dinner. Tiny fraction of people are alcoholics. Right? So a product can be addictive and not addict everyone. But when it comes to how do we use this stuff for good, this is why I wrote my first book. I didn't write it for Facebook and the gaming companies and YouTube, far from it. I wrote it for companies like Paga. It was a client of mine. I do consulting for them. They are, it's this app that has brought millions of people in Africa the ability to bank online for the first time. Conventional banks won't service these folks. And so Paga uses the hooked model, the same exact hook model that Facebook uses, to build healthy habits around saving and spending money. Kahoot, I mentioned earlier, is the largest, most widely used educational software in the world. They just went public in Norway. That's a full disclosure. I invested in that company because I was so excited about them using the hook model. If you have any school-age children and you mention this company Kahoot, 9 times out of 10, they will have used it. Same exact hook model. Fitbod, this is a cool story. So Fitbod is this company that makes going to the gym, when you are in the gym and you have this internal trigger that I used to always have of, what do I do?
Yeah.
Like, you see all these meatheads, everybody seems to know what they're doing. I don't know what to do.
And you don't want to pay for the trainer.
Exactly. And so that's the internal trigger of uncertainty, right? So I use this app. Every time I go to the gym, I don't know what to do. This app tells me exactly what to do because of the same exact hook model that these other apps use.
Yeah. So already companies are using this kind of framework to help.
Right.
Got it. And so what about number 4?
Okay. So we talked about mastering your internal triggers. We talked about making time for traction. We talked about hacking back the external triggers. That's the 3rd step. Now, the 4th step, by the way, we have to do these in order. We have to first master the internal triggers, then make time for traction, then hack back the external triggers. Finally, the last step we should do is called preventing distraction with pacts. And this uses this very old principle of a pre-commitment device, doing something in advance that prevents us from getting distracted. And so this is another motto that I like to repeat that I hope people remember, is that the antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. So in the moment, these companies will get you unequivocally, right? If you're not prepared, they're going to get you. But there are so many things that we can do in advance to prepare for times when we know we might get distracted. Okay, so we use forethought is the antidote to impulsiveness. And so how do we do that? We use technology against itself. Today, we have an explosion of free products in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store that help us tune out distraction when we want to focus. I'll give you 2 examples. The first is a product I use almost every single day. It's called Forest. It's free. Every time I want to do focus work, I sit down at my desk, I open this app, and I type in how much time I want to do focus work for. And when I do that, I see this little virtual tree. And I hit the timer, timer starts, the virtual tree is planted. If I pick up the phone and do anything with it, the little virtual tree dies. Okay? Stupid little virtual tree. It's meaningless, but it's a pre-commitment. It's a pact. Exactly, right? So that's just a little bit of a reminder to make this pact, this pre-commitment that I want to do what I plan to do, which is to do focus work as opposed to whatever it is I might get distracted with on my phone. Second example is a company called FocusMate. In full disclosure, I invested in this company because I liked it so much. FocusMate is kind of like chat roulette without all the dirty stuff. So basically what you do, you log in for a set period of time. You say, okay, I want to do focus work from 8 to 10 in the morning. And you find a focus mate for that period of time. You log in, you see them on a little video display. They see you. You say, hey, how you doing? My name's Nir. I'm working on such and such. You're working on that. And you go for a set period of time. And just that other person, knowing that other person is working while you are, is a form of a pre-commitment. It's a form of a pact that we can take to make sure we get work done. So those are the 4 steps. We master internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back external triggers, and you prevent distraction with pacts.
I love that. I love the 4th part. That was great.
But by the way, you don't do it first. Make sure you do the other stuff first.
Well,
it has to be in order.
The one thing that I'm thinking of is like step 1 is for some a lifetime of work.
Well, you don't have to resolve all. It's not about getting rid of your internal triggers. It's learning to deal with them in a healthier manner, right? So instead of drinking away your problems with booze, you're learning how to deal with them in a healthful manner. And the same goes for our technology.
I'm just thinking like if I, were to try to get rid of all of my existential crises, I think that it would take like multiple lifetimes.
Right, but wait, again, you're not getting rid of them. You're learning how to cope with them, and they will always be there. It is suffering. The Buddha said this. Suffering is part of the human condition. It is never going to go away. The question is, what do we do in response? Do we reflexively reach for our phone to escape reality, or do we learn different techniques, such as what I describe as reimagining the trigger, reimagining the task, reimagining your temperament, so we can deal with those internal triggers in a healthier way?
So after this book, I mean, we'll release this in September. Here we are a few months prior. Do you have an intention of kind of, adding anything interactive to help people with this?
I haven't planned on it yet. If you have any ideas, let me know.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I'm gonna keep a list of different resources on my website. But I'm
just thinking about how important community is, right? In all of this, and you talk about Pact, right? Like I have a friend who told me about a co-working space where people go to work on their passions, and there is a space in that house. Really, it's a house in Venice where people know when they walk in there that is deep workspace, and you do not distract them. And it's just something about being around 5 to 10 other people that are doing deep work on something they really care about that encourages you to do it.
Yeah.
Right. Other friend Tommy has these phone-free events where people come together and build community. So maybe integrating some type of, how do we identify one, or what are these additional habits that we can build to become indistractable? I can see how, we, in all things, I think we need support. Sometimes it comes from technology, sometimes it comes from other people. And so a framework is a great place to start. Awareness is a great place to start. That's why I'm doing this. But then the next step is like execution, implementation.
Right.
And how do we help people, do more than just read a book?
I love the fact that you're doing this, because I think despair is the first step to defeat. That if we let ourselves buy this lie that we're not able to do something, then we don't do anything. We despair. And that is counterproductive. And we need other support. So the first half of the book is everything we just talked about. That's only half the book. It's stuff you can do yourself. The second half of the book admits that, we live with others, right? Yeah. What about our kids? What about our workplace? What about our relationships? So the second half of the book is really about how do we involve others. And when I did this research of the book, even with this methodology, I can teach you these 4 steps of how to become indistractable. But if your boss insists on calling you at 9:30 at night and your livelihood depends on it, you can tell him you're indistractable, but if he doesn't buy it, then you have to pick up the phone.
Exactly.
And so that's where I dove into what makes an indistractable workplace. And I went to dozens of different companies, and I found 2 companies that exemplified what I would call an indistractable workplace. And what I learned was it has nothing to do with the technology use. In fact, one of the companies that I profile in the book is Slack. And Slack is this company that everybody blames for keeping them connected and tethered, right? Everybody blames Slack. But if you go to Slack, in company headquarters, you'll see this big sign as soon as you walk in that says, work hard and go home. Because Stuart Butterfield, the CEO, believes that is one of the core values of the company. And if you're on Slack past 6 o'clock or on weekends, you get chastised. What are you doing? Like, this is not what we do in our company culture.
Oh, wow.
And so it's not just about saying, okay, well, this is our rule, or this company is doing a email-free Fridays. We should do that. No, that never works. What works is establishing a culture with what's called psychological safety, where people can raise their hands and say, hey, you know what? Getting an email at 9:30 at night doesn't do it for me. Like, this is not healthy. I don't like it. And those companies that have that kind of work environment, they don't have the problem with distraction. Yeah. So it turns out that distraction is the canary in the coal mine. If your company has this always-on culture, then it turns out there's all kinds of other problems of people not feeling psychologically safe to bring up their problems. And we have to deal with that.
I love this idea of psychological safety, because I also think outside of distractions, fundamentally at a company, you want intelligent people to speak up and share their ideas so that you can grow and learn. And if there's not psychological safety, people are more afraid of being wrong and being chastised. And so new ideas don't come to light. I know that you have a hard stop, so I really appreciate your time. This was great. I think if our minds are changed one time in a day, that's pretty awesome. So thank you for your time. A lot to reflect on. And it's great to meet you as well.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that episode, and I hope that you're enjoying the podcast. It's been a really fun ride so far. I just get so excited every time I meet some of these incredible people and just love sharing their stories and ideas with you all. You can learn more about the show at thelookuppodcast.com. That's THE, lookuppodcast.com. You can follow me on social media at Wark Meinstein, WARCMEINSTEIN, on both Twitter, Instagram, and Medium. and Facebook. We have a Facebook page for the show as well, the Lookup Podcast. On Facebook, so check us out. You can also subscribe to our mailing list on the website for more future updates. If there's anything from the show that you want to catch, I've posted that in the show links for you to check out. And if there's any way that I can improve, please let me know. Feel free to reach out. If you have any guest recommendations, please let me know. Other than a couple of individuals who are helping me out in the background, this is a passion project and I'm always open to feedback and any kind of support. I want to thank Sam Palumbo and Patch Kid Music for the sound editing and the intro and outro song that he created. And I want to thank Hello There Collective for their support on my social media. You can check them out at hellotherecollective.com. All right, that's enough for me. I'm sure you're ready to go on to your next activity. Thank you for listening. And please come back again next week for another episode of the Lookup Podcast.